Howdy do folks, and welcome back to Chamber in History, where we're going over the story of every single bullet cartridge ever made throughout history, one round at a time. Now in our last episode, we examined the British Empire's leap into the modern age using the 5.77 Snider. But today, we're going out west, well, from there, to the United States, where another black powder behemoth is making its mark. This is the story of the 5070 government cartridge. Born in the aftermath of the American Civil War, it was the first ever centerfire to be officially adopted by the US military. But the 5070 didn't just serve soldiers. It was the favorite round of buffalo hunters, pioneers, and frontier lawmen. It helped secure the western frontier, fed armies of railroad workers, and sadly was a major contributor to the near extinction of the American bison. Today, we'll explore how this cartridge came to be, where it saw action, what made it so special, and how it left its mark not just on gunpowder history, but on the very land itself. So let's get into it. The year is 1865. The American Civil War has just ended, over 620,000 Americans are dead, cities lie in ruins, and the country struggles to rebuild. But the US Army is still armed with outdated muzzleloaders and percussion cap rifles. Yes, the war may have ended, but sadly the violence had not. Out west, the US government is pushing aggressively into indigenous territories. Encounters with tribes like the Lakota, the Comanche, and the Cheyenne are becoming more frequent and more violent. Meanwhile, new frontiers are opening up, railroads are expanding, settlers are moving west in droves, and the US military needs a new, modern, breech-loading cartridge to keep up with the times. Now, the first post-war attempt was the .58 rimfire, used in the Springfield Model 1865. It was based on a Civil War era ammunition, but now with a metal case. The idea was great, but the execution, not so much. See, the .58 rimfire was underpowered and suffered from severe ignition issues. Being that it was a rimfire, all the priming compound was put into the base of the cartridge, making it more vulnerable to moisture and mechanical damage. Not something you really want when you're out in the middle of a firefight. So in 1866, the Ordnance Department had a solution. And what was it? A bigger, bolder round, centerfire this time, for use in their trapdoor conversion of the existing rifles. Just like with the 5.77 Snider from the last episode. I didn't see if it was the same guy. It might be, I'm not sure. I'll look into it before I post this. And so the 5070 government was born. Now the name of the cartridge says it all. 50 meaning 50 caliber or 0.5 inches, and 70 meaning 70 grains of black powder. But this wasn't just a fat bullet. This was a fundamentally new approach for the US military. So let's break it down. It had a straight-walled rim case, a bullet diameter of 0.515 inches, case length of 1.75 inches, a overall length of 2.25 inches, a bullet weight of anywhere from 450 to 500 grains, and a muzzle velocity of right around 1,200 to 1,250 feet per second, and muzzle energy in the ballpark of 1,500 to 1,600 foot-pounds, give or take. With its large diameter slug and black powder charge, the 5070 packed a serious punch, capable of taking down any horse, man, or even bison from a few hundred yards out. But maybe more important for the bullet itself was the centerfire design. For the first time, the US military had a bullet where they could pop out the old primer, put in a new one, and reload it. This drastically increased the reliability, longevity, and logistical efficiency of the round itself for the military. The cartridge was designed to work with the Springfield Model 1866, which was a trapdoor conversion of the .58 caliber muzzle-loading rifled musket. Existing muskets were modified by cutting into the back of the breech and installing a hinged breech block. Sound familiar? This allowed soldiers to load from the rear, fire, eject, and reload, drastically increasing the rate of fire compared to the muzzleloaders at the time. Soldiers now had a weapon that they could reload 6 to 8 times faster than their old rifles, and a cartridge that hit like a hammer. Once adopted, the 5070 quickly saw deployment across America's frontier. Though it was never in any large-scale wars or battles like the Civil War, it was instrumental in smaller but fierce engagements across the plains. One of the most famous was the Wagon Box Fight of 1867. In that skirmish, 32 civilians and soldiers armed with Springfield Model 1866s faced off against an estimated 1,000 warriors from Red Cloud's war party in Wyoming Territory. Previous fights like the Fetterman Massacre showed just how devastatingly effective the Lakota and Cheyenne were against muzzleloader armed troops. However, this time the US forces were armed with 5070 trapdoors, and it changed the game. Defenders took cover behind wagon boxes arranged in a corral, and using their trapdoor rifles, poured out fire at a rate previously impossible. For over 4 hours, the attackers launched charge after charge, but the combination of cover, discipline, and the new Centerfire cartridge held them off. And when the smoke cleared, 32 Americans were still alive, and as many as 60 Lakota lay dying or dead in the field. It was a huge reversal, and most of the credit went to the 5070 itself. The round remained the standard issue cartridge for the U.S. Army from 1866 to 1873. Used in the Springfield models 1866, 1868, and 1870, as well as the Remington rolling blocks, which were both internationally and domestically issued. The U.S. Navy also adopted the 5070 cartridge for use in its rolling block rifles aboard ships, where corrosion resistance and big firepower are key. Soldiers loved the knockdown power of the 5070, but they did complain that the bullet drop and trajectory weren't quite as good at extended ranges, but this is still a black powder cartridge, and so it dropped like a stone past 300 yards. Still, for most combat scenarios in that day, this wasn't a problem. Out to 200 yards, the 5070 was devastating. As military surplus rifles flooded the civilian market, the 5070 government quickly became a favorite among hunters, explorers, settlers, and lawmen. Why? Well, there were tens of thousands of Remington rolling blocks and Springfield trapdoors converted to shoot this cartridge. This was a powerful, rugged gun that civilians could pick up cheaply after the war. The round's combination of lethal power, deadly accuracy, and amazing reliability made this a no-brainer for anyone living in the wide-open expanses of the West. Whether you're fending off wolves, raiders, or rustlers, the 5070 gets the job done. But nowhere did it make a bigger impact, metaphorically and literally, than in the hands of buffalo hunters. In the years after the Civil War, the U.S. government turns its attention to settling the frontier and subduing Native American resistance. And the cruelest tool of this campaign wasn't a cannon or a cavalry, but a rifle. Enter the professional buffalo hunters, men who slaughtered bison by the thousands, if not tens of thousands, only for their fur, bones, and tongue. I have no idea why they wanted their tongue, but I will look into it before I post this video, I promise. Now, the U.S. military didn't officially order the slaughter of bison, but they definitely stood by and let it happen, knowing that it would break the back of the Plains tribes that depended on it for nearly every aspect of their life. And at the center of this campaign was the 5070 government cartridge. Its high stopping power, heavy bullet weight, and accurate trajectory out to moderate ranges made it ideal for taking down bison, often with one shot to the lungs. Hunters like Buffalo Bill Cody and Wild Bill Hickok relied on rifles chambered in 5070 during the height of the hide hunting boom in the early 1870s. With a practiced eye and a steady hand, a single marksman armed with a 5070 could take down dozens of buffalo in a single afternoon. Now, it's hard to overstate just how much devastation the 5070 contributed during those years. In 1865, it was estimated that nearly 30 million bison roamed the Great Plains, and by 1884, there were less than 500. Now, we've recovered them quite a bit now, but they're still nowhere near what they were before they were slaughtered. Railroads like the Union Pacific and Kansas Pacific opened up the West to industrial-scale hide hunting. Entire towns were springing up just to process hides and bones. Train companies were even selling tickets for passengers to just shoot bison out of the moving cars for sport. The slaughter was mechanical and relentless. Hunters were armed with wagons full of cartridges, mostly 5070, and would wipe out entire herds from a couple hundred yards away and just leave all the meat to rot, which is just disgusting. Not like nasty, like it's a vile thing for humans to do. I don't get it, especially an animal like that. They weren't hurting anything. All they were doing was trying to limit the food source of the Native Americans and destroyed a beautiful animal. Mountains of buffalo skulls were harvested for fertilizer, hides were shipped east by the ton, and this economic engine of the West was now oiled by blood and black powder. And in the process, the indigenous tribes of the plains, specifically the Lakota, Cheyenne, Kiowa, and Comanche, saw their way of life vanish before their eyes. And there was nothing they could do about it. And the U.S. Army often encouraged this destruction indirectly. General Philip Sheridan, a Civil War hero turned Indian fighter, famously said, "Let them kill, skin, and sell until the buffalo is exterminated, as it is the only way to bring lasting peace and allow civilization to advance." In other words, the extinction of the buffalo wasn't an accident, but a policy. In the 5070, it was the instrument, accurate, portable, powerful, that made extinction scalable. It's a sobering chapter in firearms history. Yes, the 5070 was a remarkable technological leap, but it was also a tool used in one of the most efficient and deliberate erasures of an ecosystem in recorded history. Now, as the 1870s progressed, the 5070 began to show its age. The Ordnance Department, always wanting to improve what it has, was looking for a round that would maintain the power of the 5070, but with a flatter trajectory and more accuracy at extended ranges. And after extensive testing, they found their answer in a brand new cartridge, the 4570 govt, adopted in 1873. And while I am going to cover it a little bit in this episode, we're not going to cover it too much because I have to do that as its own episode, and it's a little bit further down the line. We have a few more to get to before we get to the 4570. But we're going to have a little bit here because it has to do with the 5070. This new round fired a slightly smaller and lighter bullet, a .458 caliber 405 grain slug to be exact, but also retained the 70 grains of black powder that the 5070 was using, and the result was a more efficient, more accurate rifle with less recoil and better long-range performance. The 4570 also had better ballistic coefficients and a flatter trajectory, making it perfect for the new Springfield Model 1873 trapdoor rifle that replaced the earlier models. Now, despite its replacement, the 5070 didn't just vanish overnight. It lingered in civilian use for decades and even saw sporadic military use well into the 1880s, specifically in naval arsenals and frontier outposts. Reloaders loved it, big game hunters still appreciated its knockdown power, and surplus rifles chambered in 5070 were still being sold well into the 20th century. Today, the cartridge enjoys a modest cult following. Replica Sharps rifles, rolling blocks, and trapdoors chambered in 5070 are still manufactured today for black powder shooting competitions and historical reenactments. Collectors admire it for what it was: the first ever Centerfire to be adopted by the U.S. military, a symbol of frontier firepower, and a bittersweet reminder that technology can both build and destroy. So there you have it, folks, the 5070 govt, a cartridge that kicked off the U.S. military Centerfire era, helped shape the outcome of countless frontier battles, and whether we like it or not, helped erase a cornerstone of indigenous and natural life on the American plains. It's a round that deserves both admiration for its engineering and respect for its consequences. If you enjoyed this dive into frontier firepower, then you don't want to miss next week's episode where we go back across the pond to check out Britain's 450 Adams. It was the very first cartridge ever to be adopted for a standard issue revolver by the British Army. It's got a story full of colonial skirmishes, courtroom duels, and early double-action design. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this with your fellow cartridge history nerd. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heads down, and we'll catch y'all next time. Thank you.